Not want to be a spillover for the Sydney airport now or any time in the future. We don't think that the Canberra people deserve to have traffic that is destined for Sydney to be using Canberra because they can't fly into an airport like Sydney, which does have a curfew. So that's our basic position. We make no qualms about it. We think that the community of Canberra, Queanbeyan and any other part that could be affected by night operations is entitled to at least 6 or 7 hours peaceful sleep.
Yes.
We make no apology for that. And in fact, at a meeting that I was at in Sydney with the Minister for Planning, Frank Sartor, where the airport was represented, the Minister made it absolutely crystal clear that in his opinion, Canberra one day will have a curfew. And in fact, I think the words he said to the representatives that they were kidding themselves if they thought that Canberra would remain curfew-free forever. The community would demand and governments of whatever persuasion would have to impose some sort of a curfew on the ACT. That's our position. I mean, we think that the airport can grow and as long as it's done in an orderly manner, and they can operate for most of the hours in the day, but between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning, I think people are entitled to have a good night's sleep. Yes. And that's simply our position.
Great.
I might leave it at that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. So thank you very much to Frank. There's some chairs down that front if people want to come around and sit down. There's some baby chairs on the floor. So this is Jeff. Jeff will speak for himself. I don't dare speak for Jeff.
Thanks, Jenny. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a Mackenzie Street resident, been there for over 20 years, and I hope that qualifies me as a long-term resident by now. Now, some background about the airport. First of all, in the 20s, it started off down at Dixon Library. In the late 20s, they bought the land out at Fairburn or acquired it, and the airport shifted out there to Fairburn. The current runways, the north-south runway and the east-west runway, remained so for right through the 50s. It was used by the Air Force during World War II extensively. The runways were gravel runways, and I might add, the primary runway at that stage was the east-west runway because that mostly was into wind, and a lot of those aircraft during World War II, etc., had very low crosswind component. They could only take very low crosswind. When jets came into service into Canberra Airport in the 60s, it became the north-south runway was the jet runway. In the 50s, the runways had been hard surfaced, and then we moved up into jet operations in the 60s. Initially, DC-9s for most of the time, except as passenger demand grew in the early 70s, you finished up needing some Boeing 727 services, began initially to Melbourne, and eventually both the DC-9 and the Boeing 727 were limiting on the length of runway, and in the mid-70s, the runway, the north-south runway at Fairburn, was lengthened. Now, at the same time, for that to occur, Pialigo Avenue had to be realigned, and it was shifted to its current alignment. Now, after that, in preparation for the airport sale in the mid-90s, there were some master planning processes undertaken, and there was significant community complaint then. Prior to that, jets would have been right over the top of our head now, landing into the south on the airfield, or if they took off to the north and were headed for Melbourne or Adelaide, they'd have been right over our head here. So in the mid-90s, as a result of this master planning process that was preparing the airport for sale, that was cut out. And the current aircraft flight profiles across the other side of Mount Majura there, that's where the basis of them is. Now, the airport was then leased to Capital Airport Group in May 1998, sold by the Howard government for $66.5 million. Since it was leased, the Howard government has subsidised runway upgrade of the north-south runway to the tune of about $37 million. And equally, the Carnell government, I think, put in about $8 million for the impulse hangar and other developments at the airport to facilitate impulse taking up particularly Canberra to Newcastle services. Now, since jet services began, the airline needs for the Canberra regional population have been met by services between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Now, I might also add that, that passenger demand has increased pretty strongly over the last few years. Since Capital Airport Group have owned the airport, the demand has picked up both as people had a little more discretionary income, as airline costs came down or passenger costs came down, etc. There's been an increase in traffic. Over the last 4 years though, despite a strong growth in passenger demand, the number of aircraft using the airfield, particularly airline aircraft, has remained stable around the 35,000 mark. Now, I might add that in regard to the 24-hour operation of the airport, it is based upon Canberra Airport having been a RAF operational airbase. There has been there hasn't been any airline demand for services between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. The Canberra market has been entirely satisfied by airline services between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. to this day. Now, on the Tuesday after the November election, Capital Airport Group put out a proposal for development of the airport, and a major factor in this is making it a freight hub and the second Sydney airport. Now, that would include not only domestic freight operations, but it would include international freight activity. Now, this has been followed. I'm not quite sure what the status is of the airport proposal for this development of the airport, whether it has gone to the Australian government or not, but it got overtaken by events because in April an issues paper was put out by the federal government which invites pretty much any statement you want to say about aviation for Australia can be made against this document. Now, the deadline for that is the 27th of November. June. Sorry, 27th of June. Yep. Okay. Now, in regard to the need for a curfew, the airport has foreshadowed that international services, Boeing 737 services to Fiji, to Bali are a possibility, and to New Zealand are all a possibility in the near or medium term future. As well as that, they've also foreshadowed that Boeing 767 or A330 services might equally develop to Southeast Asian ports. Now, whether that's Singapore, KL, or Bangkok, or China.